Hello, this is Pre-Calculus 12 seminar for Learning Guide 16 and it's on trig equations. So, trig equations are when we're trying to find where a certain ratio of the opposite over hypotenuse is going to find an angle. So let's look at a visual picture graphing. So let's take this situation right here. We have sine x equals 0.45. Okay, recall that we did a little while ago where we had like sine 30 and we wanted to find out what that ratio of O over H was. And we knew it was 1 over 2. Well, Learning Guide 16 is just the opposite, where you don't know this guy, but you're given the ratio, and you have to go back. So let's look at a visual picture. So graphing. So let's draw this. And remember the sine wave. We had the amplitude of 1 and negative 1, and the period was 2 pi. And we had starting in the middle and going up, coming back to the middle, to the bottom, back there. So we had a graph that looked like that. All right, so there's the sine x graph. And now this 0.45 is just a line going through here at 0.45. And what we are doing is solving where it intersects, right there and right there. So those red dots are what we're trying to solve. So let's look at finding exact values. Remember, exact values are those coming from triangles, the pi over 3, the pi over 4, and the pi over 6. So we'll be using those guys for these exact triangles. So let's just draw them out, because I draw them every time, so then I have it memorized. Okay, so let's do the pi over 4, which is 45. It's the 1 root 2. And the other one, which has the pi over 6 and the pi over 3, we remember that to be 1, 2 root 3. Okay, so we're going to be using those triangles. So let's look at this first problem. We want to solve cos x where we're given negative 1 over 2. When solving, these are the steps. First thing you're going to do is look at the sign to find the quadrants. Well, in this first problem, we have a cos and it's negative. So remember the CAST rule. Add sugar to coffee, or all students take calculus, however you remember it. And so we know that it's quadrant 2 and quadrant 3 is where cos is negative. Now, ignore the negative sign. The negative sign's use, and it only is used to find the location of quadrants. Then you ignore it after that. So now we want to find the reference angle. There are 3 ways to solve it, using the calculator, the unit circle, or the special triangles. And like I said up here, when we're finding the exact values, I know it's going to be these special triangles. So let's label. Okay, so we have an H and we have an A. So we have a 2 and we have a 1. And we can put root 3 there because we know that from our special. It doesn't matter what, I could do the top or the bottom triangle. You just need to label 1 because it's going to have the same reference angle. So now, looking up here, when I see root 3, here's root 3 up here, if I go straight across, I know this is pi over 3. So I know this guy is pi over 3. So both of these reference angles are pi over 3s. Now, the last step, determine theta. Remember, theta is from 0 to the arm. So remember back when we looked at theta, if I had a terminal arm, say right here, the theta is the distance from there to there. That is theta. So in our problem, we know that the first, in quadrant 2, that's going to be our theta. Well, so in quadrant 2, I know I'm going to go all the way to the bottom, to pi, and then back up to pi over 3. And now I know I have to have common denominators, so I'll make that 3 over 3, which is the same thing as pi, and that equals 2 pi over 3. Now let's go to the next quadrant, quadrant 3. Well, I know it's 2 pi, and then it's beyond pi. So this is going to be pi plus pi over 3. I have this little chart you can sort of look at to figure out how to find theta. But it's pretty intuitive, you can figure out. So here again, I make this 3 over 3, so this equals 4 pi over 3. Now, sometimes, that's solving it. These are the answers. I just solved it. But sometimes it's going to ask you to find the general solution. And what that means is every time you go a complete circle and you come back, it's coterminal again, another circle. So we just take the two answers. So to get this guy, this answer right here, we take the two answers and we add 2 pi n. Because remember, 2 pi is 1 revolution. N just means the number of revolutions. And we add NEI. What that means is I is an integer for that n. 1 revolution, 2 revolutions. So that's what we do. All right, let's look at example 2 now, because sometimes you're not always in radians. See this situation? The question's in degrees, so you really have to read carefully. So let's follow the steps. Let's locate. All right, so we have a sign that's negative. So sign negative, remember, is the third quadrant and the fourth quadrant. Now we're going to label this O over H. All right, so the H is 2 and the opposite is 1. Remember, ignore negative signs. Negative signs just help you to locate quadrants, and that's it. Now we know that opposite 1 is going to be 30 degrees. So that's 30 and that's 30. Now the last thing we have to do after we found the reference angle is we have to find theta. So we're going from here all the way to there. So we go to pi and we add 30. So my mistake, because I was thinking radians. So what we have to do here is make sure that this guy is in that guy. So pi is 180, my mistake. So 210 is the first one. And in the other quadrant over here, we're going to go all the way to the end and then back up. So we're going to go 360 take away 30. So that equals 330. So there's your two answers. All right, so I want you to take a moment and I want you to try these two questions. You can pause it and then check my answer. All right, so let's draw. So we have a tan. That's negative. That quadrant, that quadrant. Now we label O over A. And we get the reference angle. That is, we're in radians. So that is pi over 6. Pi over 6. Find theta. So it's pi minus pi over 6. And this is going to be 2 pi minus pi over 6. This becomes 6 over 6. So 5 pi over 6. And this becomes 12, 11 pi over 6. So there's your two answers. The bottom one, we have a secant now. Well, I gave you a hint here. Rewrite it as a cos. So we just have to make this a fraction and flip. So we have a cos positive. So we know it's here and there. And so we know this is root 2 and this is 1. And that's a pretty standard one. Root 2, we know it's going to be pi over 4 or 45. And now to get the answers, well, the first one is itself because it's in quadrant 1. The next one is 2 pi minus pi over 4. Make that an 8. Oops. So we get 7 pi over 4. So those are your two answers.